Tonight we start our series of Christmas messages that are taking us all the way through to Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And it's the understanding of Christmas through the eyes of multiple Bible characters, really. And so we're going to be taking a look next week at the shepherds in the morning. If you have the time available, come in the morning. Karen Wilson from Baptist World Aid is speaking. She is a fantastic communicator and just a great Bible teacher. And she's going to be here with us next Sunday morning at the 9 a.m. service. Please come along to that. We're going to be taking a look at Christmas through the eyes of Mary. The week after that, we're going to be taking a look at Christmas through the eyes of God on Christmas Day. But tonight we're talking about Christmas through the eyes of Herod and the Magi. You know, when you see a nativity scene, there's always certain characters in there, right? You always know that you're going to have certain characters. I mean, you can't have a nativity scene without Jesus. I mean, that's just a given, all right? If it is, it's one that you might see something similar to that in a shopping centre, but really, that's not it. So, and if you've got Jesus, you're going to have, of course, Mary and Joseph, because they kind of complete the picture there with regards to the family unit. So here they are, they're all there. And of course, then you start to get various other characters that make their way into the nativity scene, depending on how good a nativity scene you've got, right? So, you know, a cheaper version might then just add one or two animals that are farm friendly. Okay, so no one wants to forget the donkey, because the donkey is what took Mary there in the first place. Okay, so he or she has earned their stripes and they deserve sitting in the nativity scene. So you might get the donkey, and then you might get a smattering of other farmyard animals there as well. So you get the sheep, you know, because, you know, the shepherd are out at night, you know, doing their shepherding, and the angels come and they talk to them. So that's next week's message in the morning. So about the shepherds, but here they are and they'll come, so the sheep are with them, you know, they can't leave them out alone, they bring them in, there's going to be sheep. So and a good nativity scene's got to have at least those sort of characters in there as well, okay? And so then you can just start putting cattle in there and other stuff just to make the whole scene of the come alive, with the olfactory senses going overtime as well, thinking that must have been a stinky environment that Jesus was born in, and really, you know, kind of crazy. Now, if you have a really good nativity scene, okay, not just a cheap one. If you've got a really good nativity scene, then you might also get some exotic animals, okay, making their way into the nativity scene, and some mysteriously well-dressed, expensive gift givers. Like, oh no, hang on a minute, that's my wife's recent trip to Egypt, and whilst there might be some exotic animals, there were no expensive gifts that came back from that trip, I can assure you, okay? I was waiting, I was looking, but no. But it's, of course, camels, and then you get these other guys called the wise men, right? The Magi. They turn up as well. And we read about these guys in Matthew chapter 2, okay? In Matthew chapter 2, we have the idea of the introduction of these wise men, Magi. Three kings, maybe you've heard it said. Let's listen as we read through this passage to understand a little bit more about them. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who's been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them, where was the Messiah to be born? "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd the people of Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. It's kind of getting all sneaky at this point to try to really hone in on where might this Messiah be born? How old is this Messiah? Who is this Messiah? He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star that they had seen, and when it rose and went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Kind of interesting, these characters, aren't they? The wise men, surrounded by legend, really, when you think about it. Traditionally, they were recognized as three kings, and they are actually even given names. The names of them were Caspar, Melchior, and Balthazar. Now, Caspar was young, beardless, and ruddy, and he brought the frankincense. It was known that Melchior was an old, grey-haired man with a long beard, and he brought the gold. And Balthazar was this swarthy kind of newly grown beard, neatly trimmed maybe, I don't know. He brought the myrrh. And the picture of this is actually entitled The Three Magi, and it's from the Byzantine mosaic around about 565 BC. So this legend, this mystery surrounding these people had grown over the previous 500 years, and now you get this understanding that they have names. We know the lengths of their beard and what they bore. But to be honest with you, we're not actually really sure. We're not exactly sure if there were even three of them. We know that 3 gifts were given, that's what it says, but we don't know that there weren't more than that. We just assume because of the 3 gifts. Let alone knowing their names, let alone knowing other than the who bought what gift. But what we do know is that they came sometime after the birth of Jesus, and that Jesus' family now moved out of the stable and had found themselves a house in Bethlehem. Herod's decision to kill the boys in Bethlehem under 2 years of age that you'll read about in later part of the chapter in verse 16 of chapter 2 would suggest that by the time the wise men arrived, Jesus may well have been a toddler, 12 to 18 months, maybe 2 years old at this time. Technically, if you've paid more for a nativity scene with the wise men in it, you've been gypped. Because technically, the wise men actually weren't at the birth of Jesus. They come later. But we do know that these 3 visitors, these 3 magi, and if you're reading a different version of Scripture, I read out of the NIV, if you're reading, say, out of something like the King James Version, it will put wise men in there instead of magi, but it's really quite a term that is really hard to directly identify, but the legend and the understanding is that these are people who came from the region of Persia and were perhaps part of a Median tribe. In other words, you have the Medes and the Persians coming together and ruling an empire, but then the Medes were finally subdued by the Persians, and they left and they started to not be involved so much in the politics and that sort of thing, and they started to withdraw. They started to draw away from society a little bit more. They started to kind of retreat and cluster themselves together, these truth-seeking communities committed to holiness and committed to wisdom. Now, don't get it wrong. These guys are still pagans. They're not part of the Jewish community. They're not God followers per se of our God in whom we worship. They're people who are looking for truth. They're people who are kind of really skilled in philosophy and natural sciences, medicine, and that sort of stuff. Well, whether these magi came from a tribe like that or a similar group, it's incredible that these philosophers all the way from Persia would go out of their way seeking out truth, seeking out the birth of a child a long, long way from their homeland. And they did all of that on the strength of a star. These truth seekers, these ones who were restless in their spirit until they found out the truth of what would happen. These astrologers who were looking to the skies and saw a new astrological phenomenon, had a look at it and said, in our understanding, in our pagan worship and understanding, that means that God must be on the move. Something's about to happen. This is a new star. You've got to remember, these people were people who guided themselves by the stars all of the time. They knew to guide their ships. They knew how to walk across deserts and those sorts of things, guided by the stars. And when they saw something fresh, when they saw something new, they took it as a sign from God. But these truth seekers were quite prepared to leave their homeland, to pack in some really expensive prezzies and to head off to worship this king. You see, right at this time in history, people were ready for a new king. People were ready for someone, and it was heralded that there would be a Messiah that would come in the nation of Israel. This nation that had been subdued and put down and under the Roman Empire, kind of put under the foot of the superpower of the day. And there were rumors that there would rise up to be a king who would actually now come and bring peace to the world around them. And they did all of that on the strength of a star. Putting this hope together that there would be a new king and this astrological phenomenon that there's something new in the sky, putting them together and going, let's go. Imagine Mary's surprise. Imagine it when she opens the door of her, I imagine back then, similar today in really poor country areas of places like in the Middle East. That she opened the door of her one-bedroom working-class cottage in Bethlehem, a small country town, to see a group of dignified Persian philosophers and scientists climbing down off their camels. Imagine her astonishment when they bowed down in front of her little boy and started to honor him with wonderful words of worship. Imagine her deep gratitude when they start to offer expensive gifts to the family, something that would sustain them for the years to come. And then these Magi, they climb back on their camels and ride off into the sunrise. But there's another character in this passage that never makes the nativity scene for really good reasons. And that's Herod. Herod the Great was known as the king of the Jews. And in fact, he and then his son and his grandson all were imported kings into the country. They were Romans, they weren't Jews. It's not like this is a continuation of the kingly line, back from Solomon and David and all those others, that were heroes around the faith of Israel. And no, these guys were imported. These were Romans who'd come in to rule over the top of the Jewish nation and the Jewish people. And here they are, they're coming in and they're riding roughshod over everybody. This is the sort of guy he was. He was known to be able to just kind of, a bit of a megalomaniac, a bit of a guy who wanted it all his own way. He was a builder. He built ports, he built new fortresses. He even extended the temple to keep the Jews happy with what was happening. But he wasn't admired and loved by the Jews at all. In fact, he was terrified of losing his authority and power. He was terrified of the power that sat over the top of him, Caesar, and he's terrified of those who are under him that might usurp his authority as the imported king of the Jews. So much so that he is a bit of a political madman who sought glory and grandeur and a kingly status all of the time. And so when he hears that Jesus is born, can you remember what it said back in our scripture? It says there in Matthew chapter 2, verse 3, that when Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. Now understand this, that he's disturbed because out of fear, out of jealousy, he's worried that he's about to lose his throne to a new king. That's why he's disturbed. This wasn't something new to him when he was worried that even amongst his own family, there were issues that might kind of an uprising to kick him off his throne. He murdered one of his wives and then her mother, two of her sons and his own eldest son, just so he could keep control of his throne. And Jerusalem was disturbed because he was disturbed. When you've got a king like that, when you've got a king that's willing to take things into his own hands and dish out the punishment and the authority and hold it down, all of Jerusalem was disturbed. Just stop for a moment and think about the difference in these kings. A king out of fear, out of jealousy, a tyrannical kind of king who wants to rule with an iron fist, who holds his authority by the hand of a sword and wants to make sure that everybody is held down, oppressed. And a king that comes all the way from the throne room of heaven because he loves the people he created and wants to be in relationship with him. These Jews, this is why they're disturbed. They're as much in alignment with the Magi. They're as much in alignment with the ones who are truth-seeking pagans from another land who have seen something and are searching it out. And the rest of the Jewish nation would be, oh yes, maybe this is our time. Maybe we're hearing that there could be a king, a Messiah that will be born. And it'll be nothing like this king that we currently have, who's not even our king. It's complete contrast between Herod and Magi. I'm assuming the Magi had no idea that the others would not welcome such wonderful news. That's why they head straight to the king. Like, wow, where is he? It must be in this palace, right? He must be here. Is he one of yours? We've seen the star. We put it all together. Is he one of yours? They would have no idea that Herod had another agenda when he sent them off to find the baby in Bethlehem. I mean, they've traveled a world just for the opportunity to worship a baby king and offer him gifts. Who wouldn't be excited about the chance of a new world order, possibly a leader who'd bring peace? It's staggering. The comparison between these truth seekers, these philosophers, traveling to the back blocks of Israel, and a megalomaniac king who's supposed to be looking after the welfare of his people, but instead commits genocide. Matthew chapter 2, verse 16. When Herod realized that he'd been outwitted, remember the Magi had been told in a dream, hey, go a different way, and they headed back from where they came by a different route so they wouldn't get caught by the king. When King Herod realized that he'd been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. And he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and in its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time that he had learned from the Magi. When did they first see the star? Is there any chance, any possibility, this kid now grown up, everyone under 2 who's a boy gone? Imagine the papers today. Imagine the newsreels. You see, there's 2 different ways that you can look at the arrival of Jesus. There's with faith-filled, eager anticipation as truth seekers, ready to worship the King, or with jealousy that the real King will be enthroned, protective of your own right to rule your own life. It's an amazing story, but what I find really surprising within this scripture is the faith of these Magi. Just on the basis of this star. I guess God may have spoken to them, maybe directly, maybe indirectly, maybe in a dream too, just like he did when he warned them about Herod. I don't know, we don't see, it doesn't tell us in the scriptures. All we get is that they see a star, this new astrological phenomenon, and they go, oh, well, we're going. But that's always been the nature of truth seekers. Truth seekers are always prepared to lay aside the comfort, to lay aside the things that they're used to lay aside other things to be able to find the truth to be able to seek it out, to go looking for the answers. And this is what they do. I'm guessing that the people living alongside Joseph and Mary, now that they're in their house, just thought the baby next door was another squawking toddler. I mean, who are they to know? But these guys were searching for truth. They're seeking purpose. They were looking for spiritual reality, and they recognized this baby was central to the future of the world. And they were prepared to sacrifice. They were prepared to pay a price to search for the king. They weren't threatened by the truth of who Jesus really was, unlike Herod. And the sad reality is that this Christmas, there'll be many people who will view Christmas through the eyes of Herod. I don't mean there'll be some megalomaniacal king or some type of psycho ruler that goes around committing genocide. But some people today are so fearfully jealous of losing their own self-determination, their own plans, their own priorities, their own values, their own set of morals, that they don't want to come to Jesus because it's going to cramp their style. Jesus will lay claim of their life, and that means they'll have to alter the way they live, they think, they talk, they act. And the reality is we have a world full of kings. A world full of kings who are not about to bow their knee to Jesus. And so they miss the truth of Christmas, just like Herod. And at the heart of Christmas lies this incredible truth that the Magi only partially recognized, but by faith were willing to seek it out, and that Herod completely missed. That little toddler, unbelievable as it seems, is actually God's own son, who came from heaven to help us understand how much God cares for us, how much He loves us, how He wants to set us free from our own rebellion and our own self-rule so that we might, by our Creator and through faith and His own sacrificial death, eventually come under His submission. That's amazing. That's a life-giving truth that's worth abandoning everything for. Jesus put it a little differently. He put it like this a little later on in Matthew 13, now a grown man into the very middle of his ministry. And he says this in Matthew chapter 13, verse 44. And he's describing the kingdom of God, the very thing that He ushers in, the very thing at which He came. When He was born, He came to enter this availability of this kingdom of heaven to earth. And He says this about it. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again. And then in his joy, he went and sold all that he had and he bought that field. Again, Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. When he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. You get the idea, right? Knowing Christ is worth more than anything else in the world. In fact, knowing Jesus is worth more than everything else in this world. And we'll never be disappointed by Him. He is the treasure. He is that pearl of great value. And true seekers recognize it. True seekers know when they find that pearl. Truth seekers know when they find that treasure. The Magi, they recognized it. And I think some of the challenge perhaps for those who have already recognized that Jesus is their treasure, the pearl of great price, who have given up their lives, is to ensure that they realize that we realize that as we head into this Christmas season, and in all our honest attempts to be able to celebrate this truth and to be able to worship Him as God's Son, really the King of all kings, that we need to be mindful that we're not so easily distracted by everything else that's around us. all the stuff. That's not bad. Some of it has great reason behind it. Gift giving and receiving, just like these Magi did. Sharing a meal together. Tinsel and glitter, and it's all good, it's fun. But there's many people who'll celebrate this Christmas season. You work with them, you live with them. They live next door to you. They're in your neighborhoods, they walk your streets. They're the people you buy stuff off and bump into every single day of the week. They might even remember that it's all about a baby that was born a couple of thousand years ago. They might think good thoughts towards one another. They might even utter a prayer of peace for the world, or at least a hope. It's going to be a good Christmas for them. They'll enjoy their day off. But perhaps the challenge for us is, with all the familiarity that surrounds Christmas, is to be like the Magi. To realize the truth that at the center of all the celebration is Jesus. You may not have to travel across the world to honor him. You may not have expensive gifts to give to him. You certainly don't have to talk to a king to find him. But the attitude of the Magi is one of the necessary things that pervades all true worshippers. We abandon our own agenda. We abandon our own desires and priorities to offer our worship to Jesus. Truth seekers know the pearl of great price. They know the treasure when they find it, and they're prepared to give up everything else that they have to make this celebration all about him. What a great reminder a couple of weeks out from Christmas. What do you intend to make these next couple of weeks about? What do you intend Christmas to be about? Is it about him? Is it about worshiping him? Is it about recognizing that he is actually worthy of worship? He's worthy of our praise. He's worthy of our adoration. He's worthy of every part of laid down sacrifice to worship him, our King. We sung it before, hark the herald angels sing. Born to raise the sons of earth, born to give them second birth. That's why Jesus came. That's the essence of why we worship him. We've recognized him as King. The treasure we receive is the forgiveness of our sin and life for eternity spent in his good pleasure. How awesome. Jesus didn't stay a baby. He lived a perfect life and died a cruel and painful death on a cross to take for us the punishment that we deserved for our sin, that we deserved for being like King Herod, that we deserve by being ones who would be so mindful of running our own lives, of doing our own thing and making our decision. And until that moment of fear of losing control was broken in our lives and we gave it over to him, the one worthy of it all. At that moment, we received the forgiveness of all of that selfish, controlling, fearful, judgmental attitudes that resulted in actions that hurt God and one another. And he steps in, forgives us of our sin, puts his Spirit inside of us, and calls us to live a life like truth seekers, calls us to live a life who would lay down and put it aside, everything else that is around us, to be able to continue to worship him, continue to adore him. And the challenge is this Christmas that's how we'd see it. We'd see it through the eyes of the Magi, these fervent truth seekers. That we'll abandon our priorities, we'll abandon our prejudices, we'll offer ourselves wholeheartedly again to Jesus. We'll do whatever it takes to put him first. And we'll grasp this priceless truth with both hands this Christmas and we'll worship him. And when we see Christmas, when we see Jesus through this lens, we will know that every sacrifice is worthwhile because we know that we found the truth that we've been searching for all our lives.